On a gray March morning in 2002, and Darwin stood before television cameras, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded for help finding her husband John, who had vanished while kayaking in the North Sea off Seaton Carew. The wreckage of his red canoe had washed ashore, along with a single paddle, but no body. She collected £680,000 in life insurance and pension payouts, sold their properties, and eventually moved to Panama to start fresh. For 11 years, she maintained the lie to everyone, including their 2 sons, who mourned their father. Then, on a December afternoon in 2013, John Darwin walked into her real estate office in Panama City, very much alive, asking about coastal properties. Chapter 1. The Vanishing at Sea. The North Sea off Seaton Carew was particularly unforgiving on March 21, 2002. Gray wave churned against the Durham coastline with a violence that should have kept any sensible person on shore. Yet John Darwin, a 51-year-old prison officer at Holme House, launched his red kayak into those hostile waters at precisely the time he told his wife and he would. What made this remarkable wasn't his bravery or foolishness in challenging such conditions, but rather that he had been planning this exact moment for months, down to the smallest detail. The Darwins had built what appeared from the outside to be a comfortable middle-class existence. John worked steady shifts at the prison while and served as a doctor's receptionist. Together, they had accumulated a property portfolio of 12 rental houses across County Durham, presenting themselves as savvy investors riding the British property boom. Their sons, Mark and Anthony, had grown into successful young men who still visited regularly. But behind the facade of prosperity lay a financial catastrophe that threatened to destroy everything they had worked to build. £700,000 in debt. The number haunted John Darwin's every waking moment. The rental properties that were supposed to fund their retirement had become millstones, dragging them toward bankruptcy. Empty units meant no income while mortgages still demanded payment. Repair costs spiraled beyond their means. Banks sent increasingly threatening letters. John had already secretly taken £62,000 from his elderly mother's account, a betrayal that gnawed at whatever conscience remained. They were drowning financially, and conventional escape routes had evaporated. The plan emerged during whispered conversations in their bedroom, away from potential eavesdroppers. If John died, and would receive £680,000 between life insurance policies and his prison pension. Not quite enough to clear all debts, but sufficient to save them from complete ruin. The location was carefully selected. Seaton Carew's waters were notoriously dangerous, with powerful currents that had claimed genuine victims over the years. The North Sea rarely returned bodies taken far enough from shore. A kayaking accident would be tragically plausible. John paddled out that morning wearing his bright yellow life jacket, visible to anyone watching from shore. Once beyond the breakers, he executed the deception with methodical precision. He capsized the kayak deliberately, ensuring it would drift toward shore while appearing damaged. The paddle was released to wash up separately, creating a trail of evidence suggesting disaster. But John didn't drown. He had hidden a small inflatable dinghy at a predetermined location, barely large enough to support his weight, but sufficient for reaching shore at a distant point where no witnesses would observe his resurrection, and played her role flawlessly when the call came that evening. John hadn't returned home. She contacted the prison, local hospitals, and anyone who might have seen him. Her voice carried just the right mixture of concern escalating to panic. By the time she called the police, she had worked herself into genuine tears, though whether from fear of discovery or grief at what they were doing to their sons remained unclear. The search operation launched at dawn, mobilizing the Coast Guard, Police Marine Unit, and Royal Air Force helicopters. Volunteers from the local community joined professional rescue teams, scanning miles of coastline. The red kayak was discovered first, badly damaged and empty. Hours later, the paddle washed ashore nearly a mile away. Nobody. 16 days of intensive searching yielded nothing more, exactly as the Darwins had calculated. The North Sea had seemingly claimed another victim, though this one watched news coverage of his own presumed death from a hidden location. already planning his next moves in this elaborate deception that would fool everyone who loved them most. Chapter 2. The Widow's Performance. And Darwin deserved an Academy Award for the performance she delivered over the next 5 years. Each morning, she would wake in their marital bed at number 3 The Cliff, dress in the muted colors of widowhood, and prepare to face a world that believed her husband had perished in the North Sea. The neighbors offered casseroles and sympathy. The postman delivered condolence cards for months. Her colleagues at the medical practice spoke in hushed tones around her, treating her with the delicate consideration reserved for the recently bereaved. None of them knew that John Darwin was living mere feet away, separated only by a brick wall and a secret that could destroy everything. The adjoining bedsit at number 4 had been part of their rental property portfolio, but now it served as John's tomb among the living. They had carved a connection between the properties, hidden behind a wardrobe that could be moved aside like something from a Cold War spy novel. Through this portal, John would slip into their home after dark, sharing meals with his supposed widow, watching television in rooms with curtains drawn tight against prying eyes, sleeping in the bed of a dead man. Before dawn, he would retreat to his hiding place, where he spent endless days reading library books, doing push-ups to maintain sanity, and staring at walls that seemed to close in more each month. The cruelest deception was reserved for Mark and Anthony, their sons, who grieved genuinely for a father they believed the sea had stolen. When they visited for Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings, John would remain imprisoned in the bedsit, listening through thin walls to his children's voices, hearing them comfort their mother, share memories of him, and discuss how to move forward without him. And served Christmas dinner while her husband ate alone next door, separated from his family by mere inches of plaster and a lie that grew heavier with each passing season. She became an expert at manufacturing excuses when the boys offered to help with repairs of the rental property, steering them away from discovering their father's sanctuary. The near misses accumulated like cracks in glass. A tenant once reported strange noises from the supposedly empty bedsit, forcing and to invent stories about settling pipes and old buildings. John accidentally answered the door to a meter reader, pretending to be a workman, before the man could process what he'd seen. Most terrifying was when Mark arrived unexpectedly one evening while John was in the main house. The scramble to get him through the hidden door, the frantic straightening of disturbed furniture, and his breathless explanation that she'd been moving things around, feeling restless. Her son had looked at her with such concern, such loving worry for his grieving mother's mental state, that she almost confessed everything. By year 4, John's psychological deterioration became impossible to ignore. He paced the bedsit like a caged animal, talking to himself, developing elaborate fantasies about their future life abroad. The isolation was driving him toward genuine madness. They began planning their permanent escape to Panama, a country chosen for its lack of extradition treaties and thriving expatriate community. John would need a new identity, which he obtained through a grotesque bit of identity theft, assuming the name of John Jones, a child who had died in infancy decades earlier. The passport arrived in February, John's ticket to resurrection in a place where no one knew John Darwin had ever existed, and sold the family properties, telling the boys she needed a fresh start, couldn't bear the memories. They understood, these devoted sons who hugged their mother goodbye at Manchester Airport, encouraging her pursuit of happiness after such a tragic loss. She boarded that plane to Panama carrying the weight of 800 days of lies, leaving behind 2 sons who had no idea their father was very much alive, already waiting for her in Central America, preparing to build paradise on a foundation of betrayal. Chapter 3. Paradise Built on Lies. Panama City and 7 presented itself as a land of infinite possibilities for those seeking to reinvent themselves. The skyline erupted with construction cranes building gleaming towers that promised new beginnings for international investors and expatriates fleeing their former lives. Among these fortune seekers walked John and Darwin, now attempting to pass themselves off as a retired British couple pursuing their tropical retirement dreams. The humid air clung to them like a second skin as they navigated real estate offices, their British pounds converting favorably to American dollars, their criminal deception hidden beneath sensible clothing and middle-aged respectability. They purchased a 200,000-pound property in Cologne, near the Atlantic entrance to the Panama Canal, envisioning it as the foundation of their redemption. The land stretched along the coastline with dense jungle behind, perfect for the eco-tourism business they planned to establish. The bitter irony wasn't lost on, and that their new venture would center around canoe and kayak tours, the very vehicle of John's supposed demise, now becoming their pathway to legitimate income. They would offer adventure packages to tourists, guide them through pristine waters, and perhaps even share fabricated stories about their love of paddling that brought them to this paradise. The house required extensive renovation, which gave them purpose and distraction from the magnitude of their crime. John threw himself into the work with manic energy, finally free to exist in daylight after years of hiding. He cleared jungle vegetation, repaired the dock, and painted walls in cheerful Caribbean colors that stood in sharp contrast to the gray English weather they'd escaped, and established connections with the expatriate community, British retirees who gathered for tea and complained about the humidity while celebrating their escape from inheritance taxes and dreary Manchester winters. She became Linda, spinning tales about her husband John Jones, a former teacher who had always dreamed of running an adventure tourism business. Yet paradise built on deception carries its own poison. Every friendly conversation with neighbors required careful navigation around their histories. When asked about children, and would grow vague, mentioning sons back in England but quickly changing subjects. John struggled with his new identity, occasionally introducing himself incorrectly, covering mistakes with claims of senior moments. They lived in constant fear of British tourists who might recognize them, though the chances seemed impossibly remote in this corner of Central America. The local Panamanian authorities had no reason to question their residency applications, stamped and approved with the casual efficiency of a nation eager for foreign investment. The photograph that would destroy everything was taken on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. They were meeting with Mario Villar, a relocation agent who specialized in helping British expatriates navigate Panamanian bureaucracy. He suggested a photo to commemorate their successful property purchase, positioning them in his office with promotional materials visible in the background. John hesitated, some primitive survival instinct warning against documented evidence of his existence. But refusing would seem strange, potentially memorable. The camera clicked, capturing John Darwin very much alive, smiling beside his supposedly widowed wife, creating digital proof that would eventually spread across the internet like wildfire. By autumn, the psychological toll became unbearable for John. He missed his sons with an intensity that physical labor couldn't diminish. The British newspapers, and occasionally bought in Panama City, carried stories about Mark and Anthony's professional successes, their marriages, and the grandchildren John would never meet. The money that had seemed worth everything now felt like 30 pieces of silver. He began drinking heavily, rum replacing the evening tea ritual, his conversation increasingly dominated by fantasies of returning home, claiming amnesia, reuniting with the boys who thought him dead, and watch her husband's deterioration with growing panic. She had sacrificed everything for this new life, burned bridges that could never be rebuilt. But John's guilt was consuming him, threatening to destroy them both. He spoke of walking into the British embassy, confessing everything, and facing whatever consequences awaited. She argued, pleaded, threatened, but recognized the inevitable approaching like a slow-motion car crash. In November, John made his decision. He would return to London, claim memory loss from trauma, and attempt to reclaim his identity, and knew it was madness, that British police weren't fools who would accept such a convenient explanation. But John Darwin, the man who had supposedly drowned 5 years earlier, was determined to resurrect himself, regardless of the cost of the paradise they'd built on their elaborate lie. Chapter 4. The Resurrection and Reckoning. The fiction that would complete this tale would have John Darwin walking into Anne's Panama real estate office 11 years after his disappearance. shocking clients and colleagues who had never imagined the professional British woman harbored such devastating secrets. But reality proved equally dramatic when John Darwin walked into West End Central Police Station in London on December 1st, 7, claiming 5 years of amnesia had stolen his memories, leaving him confused about his identity until a recent moment of clarity brought him home. The desk sergeant who took his statement later described the surreal experience of processing a missing person who had been declared dead years earlier, typing resurrection paperwork while Darwin spun his rehearsed tale of mysterious memory loss. The story exploded across British media within hours. The man who had supposedly drowned in the North Sea was alive, sitting in a London police station, claiming amnesia that conveniently explained his 5-year absence. Television crews descended like vultures, broadcasting breathless updates about the miracle return. Newspapers rushed special editions with headlines screaming about the canoe man who came back from the dead. The initial tone was celebratory, a heartwarming Christmas miracle of a family about to be reunited. Mark and Anthony Darwin, contacted by police, struggled to process the impossible news that their father was alive. The grief they had carried for half a decade transformed into confused joy, though something felt terribly wrong about their father's convenient memory loss. Detective Superintendent Tony Hutchinson of Cleveland Police possessed the cynicism that comes from decades of investigating human deception. The amnesia story struck him as absurdly convenient, particularly given the insurance payouts and Darwin had collected. His team began excavating the Darwin's financial history and maintained her shocked widow performance from Panama, claiming equal surprise at her husband's resurrection. She booked a flight home, telling reporters she was overcome with emotion, needed to see John immediately, and understand what had happened during his lost years. Her performance might have succeeded if not for one catastrophic oversight in the digital age they had underestimated. A receptionist at Cleveland Police, killing time during a quiet shift, entered 3 words into Google: John and Panama. The search results included a photograph from a Panamanian real estate website, showing the supposedly dead John Darwin smiling beside his grieving widow, in and 6, very much alive and clearly not suffering from amnesia. The image spread across the internet with viral intensity, transforming a miraculous reunion story into one of breathtaking fraud. Within hours, John Darwin's amnesia claim disintegrated under questioning, and his flight from Panama became not a journey toward reunion, but a return to face justice. The complete truth emerged through patient interrogation and digital forensics. The hidden door between properties. The years of John living next door while and played the grieving widow. The false passport. The Panama property purchases. Every layer of deception peeled away revealed another betrayal, another calculated lie. Most devastating was the confirmation that Mark and Anthony had been deliberately deceived by both parents, their genuine grief exploited to sell the fiction. When police showed them evidence of their parents' conspiracy, the sons' world collapsed entirely. Their father hadn't died and returned. He had chosen to let them mourn while he hid in the next room. Their mother hadn't been a tragic widow. She had been an accomplished actress performing for an audience that included her own children. The trial on July 8 became a spectacle of public disgrace. John Darwin received 6 years and 3 months for fraud and obtaining a false passport. And Darwin, despite her claims of coercion, received 6 years and 6 months, the judge noting her central role in maintaining the deception. The court ordered recovery of all insurance payouts, though much had already been spent on their Panamanian adventure. The boys testified against their parents, their statements devastating in their controlled anger and sense of betrayal. Mark Darwin told reporters his mother was a hideous, lying woman who had put them through hell, while Anthony declared both parents equally guilty of destroying their family for money. Prison separated the conspirators who had once shared everything, including their elaborate crime. John served his time in relative anonymity, while Anne became notorious, her photographs synonymous with maternal betrayal. They divorced while incarcerated, their partnership unable to survive the consequences of their choices. Upon release in 2011, Both faced a world that would never forget their deception. John eventually remarried and relocated to the Philippines, seeking anonymity in another distant country, and returned to a small village in northern England, living quietly with the weight of her infamy and the permanent loss of her sons, who maintained their vow never to speak to either parent again. The Darwin case became a cautionary tale about the price of deception, proving that some lies grow too large to sustain, that technology makes disappearing nearly impossible, and that the damage inflicted on those who love us can never be undone. Two parents traded their children's love for £600,000 and received instead 6 years in prison and a lifetime of regret. The Darwins discovered what countless others have learned through history. The truth doesn't stay buried forever, and no amount of money can purchase back the trust and love destroyed by deception.